Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. My name is Reza Jafarzadeh. I'm the Deputy Director of the Washington office. And today we're going to share with you compelling intelligence and information we have received from inside Iran. But before we get to that, I want to make sure that everyone would be aware that this event is broadcast live on our YouTube channel as well as our X channel. All of them, the handle is at NCRI-US. And I know a lot of the reporters are watching this online, so no worries. You can send your questions as we go along during the event by just simply emailing it to media@ncrius.org. Again, media@ncrius.org. So let's get to the actual information. I want to talk first about the source. Make sure that you know that the source is NCRI's Defense and Strategic Research Committee, which they themselves obtained the information from network inside Iran of the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, which is the principal opposition movement in Iran and a member of the NCRI. And they have been proven reliable in the past, accurate in the past, and much of the information about the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime came from the MEK network inside Iran. Now, this information was compiled from various sources in the country. Now, I want to just mention in the beginning some of the key revelations that we're going to make today, but I'm going to elaborate during the press conference. Definitely, I want to talk about the role of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the apex of the decision-making in all of the terror operations that the regime has been carrying out since day one. We're going to reveal the MIS, that's the Ministry of Intelligence and Security of the regime, the terror structure, and also some of the key MIS terror directors. And then we're going to talk about the Qasem Soleimani headquarters, an entity that oversees the terror operations. Obviously, this is named after the terror master, the former commander of the IRGC's Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani. Then I'm going to break down some of the terror plots to see how each of them actually fit into the model and the case examples of this terror network as they have been carrying them out. And then I'll talk about the role of the foreign ministry as a key player. People think that foreign ministry is all about negotiations. It's not. It's about terror. And then I'll talk about some of the most wanted terror players. These are the ones basically that are wanted here in the United States. So let's get to the key things. Let me start by saying just last week there was a joint statement issued by the United States and several other, 13 other European nations. They basically emphasized the escalating terrorist interventions by the regime in their territories. And they talked about the surge in terror, the regime's terror threat in the territories of these countries. And of course, most of those countries that are mentioned, we, the NCRI, as well as the MEK, have been targeted in those countries. So talking about the targets, let's just look at the list of those countries that we've been targeted in France, and we'll elaborate on that, in Germany, in Albania, where some 3,000 members of the MEK are based there, become a main target of the Iran regime. In Spain, that our Spanish supporters have been targeted. In the United Kingdom, in Belgium, Austria, and Sweden, and of course here in the United States have been targets. So just take a look at this map it's primarily the map of Europe in some of the main cases that I just mentioned here, and I won't elaborate going into the details of it, but just to give you a picture of the various countries that the regime has targeted, the NCRI and their associates, and of course the most notable case is France in 2018. But also that's a very high-profile case that will elaborate on that one, but also that has continued ever since, including in May and June of 2023. Then the more recent case was in Madrid, where the former vice president of the European Parliament, Professor Alejo Vidal-Quadras, in daylight was targeted, was shot in the face, miraculously survived. And then you have the case of Albania, that basically the regime was trying to do a bomb plot against a gathering in March. That was the Iranian New Year of 2018. That was foiled, and in most of these cases, thank God, the plots were foiled. And also in Germany, we've had the cases in Stockholm and a whole host of other places in the United Kingdom, and also here in the United States in summer of 2018. So let's talk about the role of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, that he truly stands at the top of the terror operations, all of the decision making that has been made. Every key player that has been involved or is tasked with terrorism are not accidentally, are actually handpicked by the supreme leader. And I will elaborate on that one. And the orders, in many cases, the actual orders come from Khamenei, or the plan that is put together, he approves it, or actually even supervises their terror plots. There's not a single terror operation that the regime has done without either order, approval, or supervision of Supreme Leader Khamenei. It's not that some rogue elements here and there, some low-level elements just decide to blow up a place or target an Iranian dissident leader. It all goes to the top, to the Supreme Leader Khamenei. And even before he became the Supreme Leader, he was tasked by his predecessor, Ruhollah Khomeini, who tasked him in the very early days after the revolution in overseeing all of the operations related to Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militias in Iraq, and a whole host of other countries. Actually, Hassan Nasrallah, the deceased leader of Hezbollah, he said it was early days after the revolution. We went to Khomeini and we told him, you're so busy, you can't handle day-to-day affairs. I need you to have a liaison for us to deal with it. And he turned and he said, Ali Khamenei is going to be in charge. So from early on, Khamenei was on top of running the whole proxy operations, the terror activities of the Iranian regime, and now, of course, as the supreme leader of the Iran regime. So don't lose sight of the key players, even though we're going to be talking about a lot of other elements, Minister of Intelligence and others. This is basically the decision-making and the executive agencies for terrorism of the Iranian regime. Of course, on top is the supreme leader. And then at his office, a cleric, Ali Asghar Mirhejazi, is actually overseeing a lot of the coordinations and activities at his office when it comes to terrorism. The Minister of Intelligence and Security, right now it's Ismail Khatib. Always that minister is handpicked and appointed by the supreme leader, even though he's a member of the cabinet. The president has no role whatsoever in appointing the intelligence minister. And of course, the role of the president now is Masoud Pezeshkian. He oversees the Supreme National Security Council, where a lot of the coordinations are made at the UN Security Council. And then you have the Quds Force, the IRGC Quds Force commander, used to be Qasem Soleimani, now Ismail Qani. because they play a big role given the areas, the nature of the terror plot, and then the IRGC intelligence organization that is separately involved in this set of coordinations. One of the two key intelligence organizations within the regime is actually IRGC intelligence organization, along with the Minister of Intelligence, the MIS. So let's talk about our new revelation today. We have obtained a classified document from within the Iranian regime that basically shows details that was before that unknown to the outside world about the players and the directors of the Ministry of Intelligence. It actually includes the names of the MIS officials, and also on that list is an interesting person, Sayyid Yahya Hamidi, but he's known outside as Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki. Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki is the same person as Sayyid Yahya Hamidi, and he's a top official within the Ministry of Intelligence. This is the person, Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki. He serves as the MIS deputy. He's also the head of the counterterrorism directorate. Anytime the regime talks about counterterrorism, you may want to drop the first part of that word. They're talking about terrorism. He basically utilizes the resources within the Ministry of Intelligence. He actually implements the terror plots in coordination with all the other agencies that are required. And the other person is Hossein Saftari, a cleric. He is the head of the MIS Foreign Intelligence Organization. And through the intelligence stations in various embassies, he actually provides information, resources, and cover for the terrorist diplomats of the Iranian regime, and he plays a key role. He actually coordinates with Panjaki for terrorism. So these two deputy directors of the MIS are actually the ones who are involved in the coordination and carrying out these terror plots outside of the country. So they were both, just give you examples, they were both involved in the November 9, 2023 terrorist attack against Professor Al-Khovidal Quadras, former vice president of the European Parliament. This was carried out in daylight in Madrid. And the operation actually was commanded by Panjaki, but they use macro mafia network, or basically Moroccan mafia network, linked to the IRGC Quds force. They were the ones who actually executed the attack. This is the hierarchy for that terror plot against Professor Al-Khovidal Quadras in 2023. Of course, we talked about it, the supreme leader on top. At the time, it was Ebrahim Raisi, who was the president of the Iran regime, sitting on top of the Supreme National Security Council, doing all the coordinations. And then Sayyid Hossein Waizi Khatib, the Minister of Intelligence, who is still the Minister of Intelligence, was overseeing that. These are the two units within the two directors within the MIS that I mentioned were involved in that, doing the coordinations. Of course, the operation was commanded by Panjaki, and then in coordination with Saftari, using the foreign embassies and the network. It was he, Panjaki, who employed the criminal network of in Madrid, in Spain. And then Saftari using the intelligence stations in the regime's embassies to carry out this terror plot. Now, this is the list that I've been talking about. We've obtained a list that contains 25 names of individuals who are sitting in very key positions within the Ministry of Intelligence. We simply translated that word by word from Farsi. The original was is in Farsi, word by word, and you can see that a lot of them are actually almost entirely the deputies for various sections. That's up until number 8 here, and then you have from number 9 to number 17 the names and also the responsibility within the Ministry of Intelligence, and also going all the way to number 25. Keep in mind that there is almost zero information existent regarding the Ministry of Intelligence of the Iran regime. This is the most secretive, notorious agency within the Iranian regime that, with the exception of the head of the intelligence minister that is announced by the supreme leader, and a couple of deputies here and there occasionally, nothing else is actually known about them. So this is a very stunning detail about the people involved and the role that they have. Based on that, we managed to put together the organizational chart of the Ministry of Intelligence, which again, as I said, it did not exist. You can see these two individuals that I talked about, the deputy Minister of Intelligence and the head of the so-called counterterrorism, Sayyid Yahya Hamidi, but also known as Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki, and then the head of the Foreign Intelligence Organization, Hossein Saftari. Then you have the directorates. There are at least 12 directorates here that we have listed, tasked with different responsibilities within the Ministry of Intelligence. These are the key players within the Ministry of Intelligence that let's just look at a closer look at the top part of that organizational chart that we put together. You see again Sayyid Yahya Panjaki and Hossein Saftari and the other players here with the different responsibilities that they have. And here are the directorates of the Ministry of Intelligence. Now, the second information that we gathered based on our information was that actually, according to our reports from Iran, Yahya Hosseini Panjaki actually serves as the not only the deputy minister of intelligence, but he's also the head of a terrorist operation command that was unknown to us until now, that is known as Qasem Soleimani headquarters, whose task is basically terrorism. They coordinate all of the terrorist plots between the MIAS, the IRGC intelligence organization, and the Quds force. Let's take a look at this organizational chart. This is Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki, who is heading the Qasem Soleimani headquarters, but also you have the different agencies that he's doing the coordination with in carrying out these operations. You can see that for each of these terror plots, there is a very high level of sophistication, resources, facilities, but also lots of planning and coordination to carry out these terror plots. Now, let's look at how they have been actually carrying out these plots. There are actually 3 ways that the regime has used, 3 options to carry out their terror plots. First, relying entirely on their own network, using the Iranian agents, using their own embassies, their own facilities, their own operatives solely, getting nobody else outside of that network involved. It certainly has its own pros and cons, and based on circumstances, they decide this is the option that they want to do. The second option is actually a combination of the two, meaning using their own network, but also bring in some foreign mercenaries, primarily for carrying out the terror operations. And then the third one that they have often used is just relying entirely on foreign mercenaries and organized criminal gangs. So there would be, close to none traces of direct involvement of the Iran regime in case those operatives were caught or traces were left. They wouldn't be able to track them back to Tehran. So let's look at some of the examples, because when we talk about those, the network, the operations, the organization structure, let's look at some of the specific cases of terrorism and how they carry them out. In terms of sensitivity, of course, the June 28 bombing plot in Paris was so sensitive because the regime wanted that annual event that always gathered about 100,000 people. The keynote speaker had always been Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, but also they got a lot of foreign dignitaries, foreign officials, government officials from various countries, elected officials to be there. Of course, the target of that event in 2018 was Mrs. Rajiv and some of those American and EU figures. Now, in this case, they entirely relied on their own network. They had their own operatives, people that they had hired that was working as part of the Ministry of Intelligence, but also they got involved in a special case here. A senior diplomat in Europe, Asala Assadi, who was overseeing all of the intelligence operations of the Iran regime in the entire Europe, with a background also in Iraq and other places. He was the one who was directly involved. This is the event that they wanted to blow up, and they almost did it until the very last minute. The plan was going as they had thought that it would go. And these were some of the officials, group picture. You can see lots of dignitaries from the United States, Europe, Canada, a whole host of other nations. Here's the hierarchy. Of course, the Supreme Leader Khamenei was on top of it. Interestingly, during December 2017 uprising, which was the first major uprising, he came out and said, pinpointed to the NCRI and their network inside Iran, saying they were the ones who were behind the planning of these uprisings that started, with the rise of prices of chicken and eggs in Mashhad, and then expanded to almost over 25 provinces in the country. He said that the NCRI is going to pay the price for it. And sure, of course, they certainly had the plan in advance, and they decided to go ahead and carry this out. Hassan Rouhani was the president at the time, and Mahmoud Alawi was the Minister of Intelligence. Now, here's the network that I've been talking about. Reza Amiri Muqaddam was the head of the Foreign Intelligence Organization at the time, was overseeing things, working with the embassies. And here's Asala Assadi, the third secretary in the embassy, Iran regime embassy in Austria, who brought a very powerful bomb from Iran on diplomatic pouch on commercial airplane, and then gave it to the culprits to carry out the terror plot. Of course, all of them were arrested just shortly before they were able to carry it out. And then here, Saeed Hashemi Muqaddam, who was overseeing Sayyid Yahya Hossein Panjaki at the time. He was his deputy, was doing all the other coordinations. And now, of course, Panjaki is now moved up. So this is the network, and we're going to be talking more about Reza Amiri Muqaddam and Panjaki and a few others, just to show, pinpoint some individuals to show what role they play in the regime. So that was the case that entirely relied on the regime itself. Now, the other case was a combination of the two. It was in Albania in March of that year. It was a bomb plot against a major rally they had on the occasion of Iranian New Year, Nowruz. And it was entirely planned by the Ministry of Intelligence and the Quds Force, but the intelligence operatives' presence actually on the spot were MI6 agents. However, the bombers were Turkish and Balkan criminal gangs. So they managed to employ these two, combine them together. And of course, they were arrested. The plan was foiled. And, this is the hierarchy at the time: Khamenei, Rouhani, Alavi, and again, the same people. Now here, the Ghulam Hussein Mohammadiya, you need to keep his name in mind. He was, at the time, the regime's ambassador in Albania, who had just been appointed a short while before that. He was eventually expelled from Albania. The entire operation of the embassy was shut down. The Albanian government, with the support of the United States, shut down the Iran regime's embassy there. Again, you see Panjaki's role right there, and Reza Amiri Moqaddam. So we'll talk about Mohammadiya and Amiri Moqaddam later. So in terms of entirely using criminal gangs, this was the case in Madrid in 9th of November 2023, assassination of Professor Alejo Vidal-Quadras. The Spanish police investigation showed that the Iran regime was actually behind this criminal gang. The head of this gang, Sami Bekal Bunouari, is actually in Iran right now. And Alejo Vidal-Quadras was actually blacklisted by Tehran for his support for the NCRI, a year before that. So this is the scene from in Madrid shortly after Professor Alejo Vidal-Quadras was targeted. He was shot in the face, but he was miraculous to survive because the bullet went from one side and went out from the other side, and he suffered a lot of the injuries, but it didn't go through the brain. And then the gun actually jammed. They could only fire one shot. So now the Iran regime has actually targeted also Americans. They have blacklisted several high-profile American figures who are opposed to the regime, including a former Secretary of State, a former National Security Advisor, former NATO, CENTCOM, and other commanders of the U.S. military. And specifically, they have targeted and threatened the President of the United States of America. Let me just make a couple of more recent such threats that have been made. And on July 4, 2025, the Friday prayer of Tehran, Ahmad Khatami, called for the execution of President Trump. Now, when we talk about Friday prayer leaders, specifically when we talk about the Friday prayer of Tehran, it's not just a cleric just gets on the podium, just decides on the spot, off the cuff, just makes threats here and there. These Friday prayer sermons are very, very carefully scripted. The note goes from the office of the Supreme Leader to all of the Friday prayer leaders. They know exactly what to say, what not to say. So everything these Friday prayer leaders say, you should consider them as the policy of the office of the Supreme Leader. The order has come from there. Now, shortly after that, 3 weeks after that, on August 1st, just last week, over 2,000 clerics from Qom basically reiterated that threat made by Ahmad Khatami, calling for the execution of President Trump. Now, interestingly, Khamenei's website posts a video clip since last year threatening Trump with murder this is widely viewed by now, but I think it's important to just take a look at it to see how these threats go all the way up to the Supreme Leader Khamenei. It's not just some ragtag elements or some clerics making those statements. This is the video clip posted on Khamenei's own website. Now, let's talk about specific cases here. Now, the reason I talked about Sayyid Yahya Hosseini Panjaki, particularly at this press conference, is that according to the FBI, he was the commander of a terror plot in the U.S. From December 2020 to March of 2021, which was carried out with the cooperation of a criminal network led by Naji Sharifi Zindashti. Now, Zindashti network was connected to Unit 840 of the Quds Force. You remember I mentioned that in the earlier slides, which actually that, Unit 840 was also behind the March 2018 terror plot against the MEK members in Ashraf in Albania. You can see the connection, how the criminal gangs are employed by the Iranian agents at the Ministry of Intelligence to carry out terror plots right here in the United States. This is another directive put out, release put out by the FBI, seeking information about these two individuals, Reza Amiri Moghadam, we talked about, and also Ghulam Hussein Mohammadiya. This was just put out just last month. They're seeking information about these two individuals. So let's take a closer look at them. This was a statement put out on July 15, 2025 by the Washington field office of the FBI, basically asking for further details, information about three individuals, two of which we talked about today, Reza Amiri Moghadam and Ghulam Hussein Mohammadiya. Interestingly, who is Reza Amiri Moghadam? Reza Amiri Moghadam is right now the regime's ambassador in Pakistan. But before that, he was, as I detailed here, part of the network, always involved in terrorism, always part of the Ministry of Intelligence. This is a 2007 picture that was taken in Iraq. You can see at the head of the table, seated is the Nouri al-Maliki, the Prime Minister of Iraq. And across from the table is Ambassador Ryan Crocker right here. who was the U.S. ambassador to Iraq at the time. The topic of the discussion was the security of Iraq. They are trying to negotiate with the Iranian regime to see how they can lower the tension, end the terrorism in Iraq, because the Iranian regime, everyone believed, and they could show that was behind much of the terror operations there, specifically sending the EFPs and IEDs across the border, targeting Americans. And right here, this is Reza Amiri Moghadam sitting right, negotiating with the U.S. ambassador how to settle the scores, how to fight terrorism. This is the Hassan Kazemi Qomi, the Iran regime's ambassador at the time in Iraq. He was a member of the Quds Force since day one. With that capacity, he was based in Iraq. And then you can't see it here, but that's later became the foreign minister of the regime, who was crashed, Hossein Abdullahian, with Rais's plane. So this whole, negotiating team of the supposedly diplomats of the Iran regime negotiating about ending terrorism is all of the people who have been part and parcel of the terror operations of the Iran regime, dating back to then, but also afterwards. Let's take a look at the other picture here. Here's another picture taken at the negotiating table. Of course, you can recognize some of the people here at the table. This is taken June 27, 2015. This is the JCPOA talk. This is Robert Malley, who was part of the negotiating team of the United States with Iran, that Mr. Moniz, who was the Secretary of Energy at the time, Secretary John Kerry, Wendy Sherman, who was the Undersecretary at the time. And then here is the Iranian regime's negotiating team. This is Javad Zarif, the foreign minister. This is Majid Takht-Ravanchi, who was part of a negotiating team, who is right now, as we speak, part of the Iran regime's negotiating team with the Americans. This is Abbas Araqchi, the current foreign minister of the regime, who is meeting the counterpart with Mr. Witkoff. And this is Ghulam Hossein Mohammadi, who is just sitting there watching the whole situation. He was the Minister of Intelligence, Director for International Affairs, who sat in all of the negotiating teams with the Americans. For some years, he was based actually at the regime's UN mission in New York, handling the Iran regime's operatives here, who posed as experts, as Iranian dissidents and others, but they were actually carrying out the operations on behalf of Tehran. So this is another picture of that. Again, Majid Takht-Ravanchi, the current member of the negotiating team, former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, Abbas Araqchi, and then Ghulam Hossein Mohammadi, and then you have the EU envoy Catherine Ashton, who was negotiating with the Iran regime on behalf of the European Union. So the bottom line is that what we really have exposed today is actually a comprehensive picture of the regime's terrorism structure, particularly its new network run by the Ministry of Intelligence, but in coordination with other agencies, including the IRGC intelligence organization, the Quds Force, and their embassies. We talked about Khamenei's irreplaceable role as the final authority in every single major terror operations of the regime outside of the countries, almost since day one that the regime came to power, not only when he became the supreme leader. And then talking about expanding the terror network that is basically designed to compensate for what the regime is lacking, which is the deep vulnerability that the regime is facing inside Iran, and also losing a lot of their proxies outside of the country. This is not the same regime as it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. So how do you make up for it? You step up terror in order to make up for it. And that explains these new entities. This explains the stepped up effort by the Iran regime. This explains the threats that they're making. But also these threats, every single one of them should be taken seriously, because this regime has the track record of carrying out these operations. So what are the necessary measures we feel should be taken? Definitely all of the embassies, the diplomatic missions, affiliated cultural religious centers of the regime must be closed, because they all are working as part and parcel of these operations. In order to carry out terror operations, you need intelligence, you need people, you need operatives. You need very little details here and there that may sound benign information on their own, but when they are combined with the plan, they become actually necessary parts of your terror plot. So all of them are the ones who are complicit in one way or the other. And of course, here in the United States, both the IRGC and the MIS have been designated as terrorist entities, and later as a FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization. But the same situation must be done in Europe, but also here it must be fully implemented. Then obviously the agents of the MIS and Ministry of Intelligence, the IRGC, including the unofficial lobbyists, they need to be prosecuted, punished, and expelled, because they are the ones who facilitate terror. They prepare the grounds, and their regime must be really held accountable. And this may sound as a, obvious statement, but think about it. The Iran regime has never been held accountable for their terrorism. To the contrary, they have always been rewarded for their terror. This is not just a simple statement that we're making today. Look at the trend. For every single terror operation the regime did, they got rewarded. They used hostage diplomacy, taking hostages, getting ransom, getting money, getting resources, getting concessions. And then after that, those hostages were released. A few more were taken. The hostage issue has been going on since the early 1980s. This is 2025. How has that flourished over the years? Because the outside world, the West, European nations, the United States, allow terrorism to become the most profitable business for Tehran, become the central element of pursuing their foreign policy. Their foreign policy, the whole Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not built on economic interests, as many of the nations are built that way. They're built on carrying out terrorism, creating cover for that. That's the cornerstone of their policy. That's why that one sentence there is extremely important. And of course, when it comes to the United Nations, the sanctions must be imposed on the regime, but also on the Supreme Leader. Supreme Leader himself must pay the price for all of the role that he has played over the years in terrorism. Now, having said that, I think you've got the complete picture, both based on the new information that we obtained. Again, that document that I mentioned, that I showed here, is extremely important, because after 46 years, no one knows anything about the Ministry of Intelligence. We expose a lot of things about the nuclear weapons program of the Iranian regime, the SEPAN organization that oversees their terror operations. We expose nuclear sites, we expose experts, a whole host of other things. But when it comes to their terror operations, when it comes to the Ministry of Intelligence, almost zero intelligence is available. So that's why the information we revealed today is extremely important to be taken seriously and to be followed up immediately afterwards. So with that, I'd like to open the session for the questions you may have. And we have a microphone that is going to be circulated. So please, we're going to go here. When you want to ask your question, please identify yourself and the media you represent, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for your presentation. David
Sure.
Zia for Real America's Voice News. Is the regime in Iran acting out of desperation with the recent executions of 2 MEK members and the alleged Israeli spy, along with as many as 5 others recently, and what can we do about it?
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that, the question. Certainly, you can see the sign of desperation of the Iran regime, no doubt about it, because the regime has lost much of the pillars that they relied on over the years. They relied on the repression inside the country as a way of holding the population. That has not worked. We have had several rounds of major uprisings in Iran since 2018, and the vast majority of the population are opposed to this regime. Especially in the recent years, it's the poor, the deprived, the smaller towns and cities who used to be the bedrock of support for the mullahs who are standing up and protesting. Then you add to it the loss of the proxy power of the Iran regime. You look at the Hezbollah, look at the Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, a whole host of other groups that they've had in the region. And their biggest ally, Assad, is gone. So this was not just a luxury element for them. They relied their existence on it. They call those groups and entities as a strategic depth for the Iran regime. That's why they're so desperate. And this coincides with the rise of activities in Iran, with the rise of the organized resistance, specifically the resistance units of the MEK, which just over the past 1 year, they had over 3,000 acts of resistance targeting the Revolutionary Guard, showing the Iranian population that the IRGC is not 10 feet tall. They're vulnerable. They're vulnerable not just outside of Iran, but also inside the country. So that's why they started, God bless you, they started waging executions against the dissidents, particularly the MEK, the 2 political prisoners associated with the MEK, Mehdi Hassani and Nader Hassani, were imprisoned for their role during the uprisings, and they wanted them to be. They wanted to break them, to come and confess and endorse the regime, distance themselves from the movement. But they said, we're not going to bargain about our life. We have a goal, we have a commitment, we have a responsibility. We're going to stick and stand firm. They stood very firm. They remained loyal. They paid the price, but it was a signal to the rest of the population that with this regime, there's only one way ahead of us, and that's to stand firm against them. Their days are numbered. Thank you for your question. Please. Okay, here first, and then we go back. Yeah, please.
Sorry, it's Cameron Henderson from the Telegraph-US.
Right.
From your list of 25 people involved in Iranian terrorism, are any of them involved in the current negotiations with the US over a nuclear deal?
Well, the names that we mentioned in our report are basically the ones who are the Ministry of Intelligence operatives. I mentioned that part and parcel of the network is actually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the regime. They are the ones who are tasked with negotiating with the United States, but they work very closely and hand in hand with those names that we just mentioned on the list. So whether those persons actually physically are in the negotiation with the United States or not, they're part and parcel of that network. Now, I mentioned several names here. For instance, Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister. He has a background with the IRGC. He has been part of that network, working very closely with these ministers of intelligence. His job is to basically cover for the terror operations as it has been. He has been a senior official of the foreign ministry for decades. Now he's the foreign minister, but he's been there for many, many years. Majid Takhtravanchi, part of the negotiating table, who sits in every meeting with the Americans. He spent many years right here in New York as part of the UN mission, and also part and parcel of the cover-up. A lot of those negotiations that the regime did in order to free their terrorists that were caught. In the case of Assadi, I mentioned here Asala Assadi, the former diplomat of the regime that was caught and put on trial and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. The first time a sitting diplomat of the regime was convicted of terrorism. And after spending a few years, just 2 years ago, in a swap exchange with Iran, he was freed and sent back to Iran after the regime took a Belgian citizen hostage. Who was doing all of these negotiations to get the terrorists out? Of course, it was, Arakchi himself was involved in that negotiation, and so many other officials. One of the key responsibility of those negotiators with the Americans is to, A, facilitate terror operations, provide intelligence, provide cover, but if they are caught, negotiate to get their people back to Iran. How do they negotiate to get them back to Iran? They take hostages. So they're clearly part and parcel of a terror operation in order to carry out, these activities. In that sense, I would say I'll tell the U.S. negotiating table, those people who are sitting across the table from you, they are the ones who are involved in terrorism. Otherwise, they wouldn't be part of that negotiating team. The whole Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the regime is built on that. Javad Zarif, the former foreign minister of the regime, said that he always, almost on a weekly basis, met with Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force. He said, I basically took directives from him after the general policies were announced by the supreme leader. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is run by the terror network, is run by the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards, is run by the supreme leader who oversees all of their terror operations. So I tell the American delegation and others, Europeans, don't look at those who are sitting across the table as diplomats. These are terror masters, these are terrorist diplomats. Okay, we're here and then we'll go back there, please.
Thank you very much, Ali. John Gizzi from Newsmax. I have a two-part question. First, it's impressive that you have these classified documents and have gotten the depth of this information. Can we assume that any high-powered agents in Iran's network of terror have defected, and that's why you have this information?
Well, the way I can't get into details how we actually get the information. It's not just the information that we released today on the terror network of the regime or the Ministry of Intelligence. We have the same situation with the nuclear weapons program of the regime, but also with the information coming from inside the country about how they operate. It could easily be a combination of all of those things. Being able to obtain information. Keep in mind that when you have, in a consistent manner, over the years, over 4 decades, in all areas, you gain access, actionable but very accurate information. There's no way in the world you could do that unless you have a widespread network on the ground. Network of your own people, your own, the resistance units, when we talk about them. Of course, one aspect of it is the activities, the actions they take against the IRGC. But there are ears and eyes of a nation, of the movement. So we have different ways of getting information.
Right. The other thing is, you talked about proxies that the regime uses in carrying out terror. And obviously, to blend in other countries, they would have to use people. Do you have any evidence that the regime engages, say, with the Wagner Group in Russia or Boko Haram or any of the named terrorist groups that operate worldwide?
Let me, I don't have specific information about, the Wagner Group, for instance, or Boko Haram, but let me get into, and the reason I talked today about 3 ways of the regime carrying out terror operations is extremely important to understand that, there's one thing that we say that the regime is employing criminal groups, narcotic groups, and others to carry out things. It's not that they just, decide, okay, today we're going to hire. It's like hiring a company, hiring a person. We're just going to hire some people to do the job for us. No, the regime is actually running those networks. The Moroccan criminals, they, for years, they have, the person who is now in Iran, I mentioned the name here, he has a house in Dubai. He has a house in Iran since many years ago. He's now in Iran. So it's part and parcel of their network. The regime, one of the key proxies of the regime has been Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been extensively involved in drug trafficking, in narcotics. It's very beneficial for them, not just money-wise, but you get access to a network of criminals who will carry out the job when you need them, and you can trust them to do the job for you. So it's a necessary part of the operation of the Iran regime to have contacts, to nurture, to develop, and to expand these criminal groups. One example I mentioned in the case of the assassination plot against Professor Al-Khovid al-Quadras. The relationship and the connection between the criminal groups and the regime goes back to many years ago. The same situation, this same network of the Moroccans and then other nationalities in France, for instance, they have very direct connection with these 2 entities I mentioned at the Ministry of Intelligence. Said Yahya Panjaki, his job is actually to run these networks of criminals. So that's why it's not about just today or yesterday or this case or that case. It's about the way the whole structure of the terror operation of the regime uses. Criminal gangs have become part and parcel, an important part of that network. But unfortunately, I think no one had really paid attention on that before, and the regime is increasingly, as it was evident in the statement put out by the joint statement about 14 countries, they did talk about the regime using those criminal groups carrying out their terror operations. Thank you. Yes, please, back there.
Anthony Marshak from MTV Lebanon. You mentioned earlier that Iranian embassies are often used as platforms for coordinating terror operations. Based on your findings, can you confirm whether the Iranian embassy in Beirut is involved in such activities, especially in connection with Hezbollah you mentioned, or regional plots?
Absolutely, for sure. Not only the Iran regime's embassy in Lebanon is no exception, but given the presence of Hezbollah and a whole host of other groups there, one of the main tasks that embassy has been tasked with and been involved is building that kind of connection, recruitment, facilitating the activities there. And if you are going to pick like 3 embassies that you're going to close right now first before you go to the others, the embassy in Lebanon would be on top of those 3 embassies. That's for sure. The same situation was the Houthis in Yemen. The embassy was basically, the personnel were all the Quds Force people, people who with the background entirely in terror operations, military operations, and all of that. So it's the same situation in Lebanon. Thank you for raising that. Please, another question right here.
Thank you very much. It's Saeed Shah from the Pakistan Daily. As you mentioned, one of the person you mentioned is ambassador in Pakistan, Raza Amiri Muqaddam. So it is like last month, Federal Bureau of Investigation released said like they are seeking information for a former CIA agent killing. So when you said like most of their foreign ministry people are involved in spying and things like that. So at the moment, like we didn't see any public demand from United States to Pakistan for the arrest of Raza Amiri Muqaddam, and Pakistani government claimed and they defended like he have diplomatic impunity. So you think so? You are this effort put some pressure on United States or Pakistan to do something what you are want.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the diplomatic immunity, and the Iran regime has been systematically over decades misusing the diplomatic immunity as basic license to carry out terror without being held accountable. That's what it means for the Ayatollahs. In the case of Ayatollah Assadi, for instance, in the Paris terror bombing, the regime was using that, making that argument. It was too bad for them that he was arrested not in his territory of so-called diplomatic immunity, which was Austria, because he was the third secretary in Austria, but he was arrested in Germany. And he couldn't use that. And so the regime feels, okay, so long as we have that cover of diplomatic immunity, we can do anything. We can carry out any kind of terror operations. We can hire, killers and just get away with it. I think this is the time to put an end to it. And, Raza Amiri Muqaddam is, I think, the best example that I think needs to be focused on. Given his background, given his involvement. There are so many statements put out by European nations, by the United States, by the FBI, by the intelligence agencies and judiciary of various European countries about Raza Amiri Muqaddam, his involvement in a series of terrorist plots. So he shouldn't have been accepted, to be honest with you, and to begin with, by the Pakistani government to represent as a, the country as a diplomat. But now that he's there, we need to keep the focus, making sure that he's held accountable.
Just one last question.
Please.
So your primary objective is change of regime in Iran, and it seems very failed even during this Israel-Iran direct conflict. Even after this conflict or during this conflict, we didn't see any uprising over there. We didn't see any of your ground support over there. So how is that possible without the public support from the ground of Iran to fulfilling this objective, change of regime in Iran? Thank you.
Well, obviously the desire for changing the regime in Iran dates back to many years ago, as was evidenced in the uprisings in Iran, when the foreign governments were not only not involved, but they were so focused on negotiating with Iran, giving them concessions, that people just went ahead and carried out their protests, calling for regime change, chanting death to the oppressor, be the Shah or the supreme leader, death to the dictator, death to Khamenei, all throughout these years. So the desire of the people for change is independent of what the outside world does, whether they help the regime or harm the regime. That's one thing. Second, especially in the circumstances when you have a war, the least one can expect is for the people who are just trying to basically protect themselves and stay alive, to see them get involved in stepping up activities. That's not going to happen. It has never happened. None of the changes in other countries over the past 50, 60, 70 years has happened as a result of the war, with the exception of, like, for instance, a foreign government actually going in and invading a country like Iraq. That's a different thing. You know, U.S. military went there and just basically overthrew the government there. But short of that, I think we need to look at in the bigger picture, the desire of the people, the reaction of the Iran regime. The fact that the regime has stepped up the murder and killing of the public after the conflict ended for now is a clear indication where the fear is. The focus of the regime is actually against the public, those dissidents, but specifically against the organized force, which is the MEK, that they want to create fear among the population that you don't get close to them, otherwise you're going to pay the price. Thank you. Yes, please here.
Hi, thank you so much for your time and for hosting this event and the opportunity for questions. I had just a couple of questions to build on the discussion here. Could you talk to us specifically about the personal cost of those who want to see a regime change operating in Iran over these past months? You mentioned a retaliation or a fear campaign. What are they doing to those who are trying to expose what's happening?
Well, certainly when you stand up against the Iran regime, there's a price. Everyone knows it, and the regime wants to make sure that everyone knows it. And that's why these two individuals, Nader Behruz Ehsani and Mehdi Hassani, who were executed, they were arrested many months ago, a couple of years ago. They were already sentenced to death, but they wanted to carry out the sentence, the death sentence, despite a huge campaign internationally against their execution. They wanted to show the public that even though the regime is weak, we're going to make up for it by repression, by the killings. So it's very obvious that, as an earlier question pointed also, that this regime is desperate. They're fearful of their own population. They're fearful of the people who are standing up against the regime in different ways, whether by protesting, whether harming them, whether targeting the Revolutionary Guards. Because at the end of the day, when you want to bring about change, you need to target the Revolutionary Guards. You need to target the key centers of power who keep the regime in power. And that's really solely the responsibility of those resistance units in Iran, the same network of the MEK, that they're risking their lives. And that's why the regime is focusing on them. And I think it's so important for Europe, the United States, Western nations, to make it very clear to the Iran regime that when you kill individuals like this, when you start hanging people, close to 1,600 people have been executed. These were prisoners, including political prisoners, since Pezeshkian took power just a year ago. That's an extremely high rate, even higher than the previous years. So this is only the sign of desperation, meaning this regime is weak. This is the time for the United States and other nations to step up, build pressure on the Iran regime, hold them accountable, but create space for those who want to bring about change.
And then, thank you so much. That was very specific and thorough, which we appreciate. Also, are there specific organizations or individuals in the United States right now, or at least having an influence, spreading either propaganda or acting directly on behalf of orders from Tehran?
Well, the Iran regime has a very, very sophisticated, vast network of activities here. Some of their people who were carrying out the mission for Tehran were known lobbyists. Like there was an organization called NIAC that was headed by a person who was in direct contact with Ghulam Hossein Mohammadi when Mohammadi was the secretary here in New York. His name was Tirta Parsi. His handler was Mohammadi, and he was meeting with Zarif repeatedly. So it became a known element for everyone that, okay, this is the organization that basically acts on behalf of Tehran. But this wasn't the only operation of the Iran regime. They had a number of people planted in different places who posed and acted as experts in this think tank, that think tank, even at the negotiating table with the representing United States. One example was a woman, Aryan Tabatabai, who later made her way to become a part of the negotiating table of Rob Malley, sitting across the table with the Iranian regime's delegation. But in fact, she had close ties with the regime because earlier in 2014, she was recruited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the regime and some other agents in Vienna. She traveled to Iran and agreed to create what they called Iran Expert Initiative with a few others who would pose as experts but carry out Tehran's mission. And not by accident, one of the first things that this network did and this woman did was to put out statements against the MEK, calling them terror calls and attacking them and all of that. And of course, this was all part and parcel of the strategy of the Iran regime. And of course, a lot of that information became known. There's an investigation going on right now. Congress is asking about it. What's the situation with that Iran Expert Initiative, the people who were involved with that? But you shouldn't think that that was only the only part with that. There are so many other people who are hired in different ways to push the agenda of the Iran regime and in an implicit way try to basically sideline this approach to bring about change in Iran. One of the things that the regime has recently done over the past several years, especially after the uprising started, was, and after the known network of the proxies of the regime were exposed here, was to reach out to remnants of the Shah's dictatorship because the people would view them as opponents of Tehran. So they wouldn't have the label as like Nayak has, and specifically the son of the Shah just came out and talking about the IRGC playing a role, that he's regularly in contact with the IRGC, that they are the ones who are going to be the force for change, that the IRGC is going to be protecting the nation after the fall of the Ayatollahs, that there are so many elements within the IRGC that we can work with, basically whitewashing the IRGC and as a way of sidelining and going against those who really want to bring about change in Iran. And interestingly, just last month, he put out a QR code on the internet asking the IRGC and the Ministry of Intelligence and the state security forces to fill out this application to join him. And he claimed that 50,000 of them did that. I mean, the last time I checked, when in Syria people wanted to overthrow Assad, they didn't fill out any applications or call anyone. You just go out and fight and overthrow the repressive regime. So there's something very spooky about this, as though that the only people who he reached out to was not the people of Iran, none of the others, because they reject dictatorship of the monarchy. He was reaching out to the IRGC, and the outcome of all of these actions is helping the regime, keeping the regime in power. So you need to understand that the regime doesn't operate as a standard operation as they did, a decade ago. They're a lot more sophisticated. We need to be very much aware of their operations. There are some calls for investigation about the connection of the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, with the IRGC, because IRGC is a designated foreign terrorist organization. Any kind of contact or giving to them legitimacy or connections is against the U.S. law. Okay.
If you have time for just one more, too.
Please.
I wanted to ask specifically about President Trump. I know you brought up these previous and more recent threats to his life. How do you think the administration is handling these issues? I know there's been an effort on diplomacy. We've also seen the military actions over this past summer targeting those nuclear sites. So what do you like that the Trump administration is doing? And I know you did already mention several specific policies you would like to see moving forward as well.
Well, certainly, first of all, anytime the Iran regime makes threats, you need to take it very seriously, because they have a track record of carrying out terrorist operations, and specifically, look at the cases of the Marine barracks bombing in Lebanon back in 1983, what they have done in Iraq. It started with the embassy takeover in Tehran in 1980. The whole policy of the regime is built on that. So it's not just somebody just making off-the-cuff statements against President Trump. The whole structure, as I discussed here today, is built to carry out terrorist operations. So that's one thing for sure. Second, in order to really target the regime, you really need to go after their sources of financial resources. You don't want to give them money. You don't want to lift sanctions, because all of the money goes to the IRGC that basically controls the whole economy. How is it in the world that Iran has the second largest gas and oil reserves combined in the world? We have a lot of resources, a lot of money, but 80% of the population live below the poverty line. Where does the money go? It goes to these proxies. It goes to the development of nuclear weapons. The nuclear program of the regime has cost the Iranian people $2 trillion. That's a huge amount of money. The whole revenue of Iran since the mullahs came to power, if you add them all up from oil, is about $1.5 trillion. And yet just the cost of the nuclear program has been $2 trillion. Add to it the missile program, the drone program, all of these things. And that's why you don't want to legitimize the regime. You don't want to give them resources. You don't want to allow them to operate as though this is a normal situation. But at the same time, they need to recognize that Iran is recognized by its people, not the regime, and the people are opposed to it. If you want to talk about the people of Iran, you look at the uprisings since 2018 in all 31 provinces of the country. You look at the organized resistance that has been in existence since day one after the mullahs took power, and they've paid a huge price opposing the Iranian regime. This is the organized resistance that exposed much of the nuclear sites of Iran, exposed their terror operations, their missile program, their drone program, has acted as engine for change, has offered an alternative to the people of Iran, diametrically opposite to what the Ayatollahs represent. They've introduced a 10-point plan led by women, actually, which is very important because the regime is misogynist, and the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, a female leader, has introduced a 10-point platform for the future of Iran that has the support of some 4,000 parliamentarians in Europe and the majority of the House here. That's where you want to focus when it comes to Iran, rather than just thinking about the regime itself, what to do, what not to do with the regime. The bigger chunk, the bigger portion of Iran, it's the majority of the population and a very defiant and committed resistance. That's where the focus should be. Please, yes.
You've talked a little bit about the recommendation that the United Nations should sanction the supreme leader. How would you recommend balancing that with not negatively affecting every Iranian citizen who depends on that economy?
Well, certainly you start with the snapback of sanctions because there were 6 UN Security Council resolutions imposing a whole host of sanctions that primarily targeted the Revolutionary Guards, the military, the state security forces, their missile program and all of that. They were all put on hold as a result of the JCPOA. There is a mechanism to bring them all back, but that mechanism is going to expire in October. So this is the first urgent thing the United States need to do, is to work with the European partners to snap back those sanctions first. Second, hold the regime accountable, because the people of Iran are already suffering as a result of the rule of the clerics, are already getting poorer and poorer every day. They're already being subject to killings and murder in Iran. I mentioned, close to 1,600 executions. Just since last year, the so-called moderate president, Pezeshkian, has taken office. So there's nothing that these pressures is going to harm the people. It actually helps the facilitating change. It makes the regime weaker and puts the focus on the regime and creates a space for the organized opposition. Any other questions? Yes, I guess we have some online questions. I want to make sure that they don't feel that we forgot about them.
Yes, the first question is from Joshua Klein from Breitbart News. Josh says, several senior Iranian clerics have issued fatwas declaring President Trump a Mohareb, an enemy of God, effectively calling for his death. How seriously should these fatwas be regarded? And does the Iranian regime have the capability to act on such threats in a meaningful or operational way? He has another question but I think you should take this first. Okay, and then.
First, when it comes to the threat of the Iran regime against the American officials, specifically against the President of the United States, it should be taken very, very seriously because specifically the actions that the United States has done against the regime, dating back to Qasem Soleimani, the terror master, and so many other activities. This regime is desperate. They need to counter that. So I would take it very, very seriously. Now, whether they have the capabilities, it all depends on what the United States and other nations do. The regime is only capable as much as the others allow them to be capable with. When concessions are there, if Tehran is rewarded with terrorism, of course they become more capable, more bold, they get more resources, and they get more committed. If you hold them accountable, if Tehran understands that for every single threat they're making, there's a price that they're going to pay. For every single contact that they have with these proxies, they will have to pay the price for it. Then they will think twice about that. Tehran only understands a language of force and decisiveness and firmness. That's the language you want to speak with. So don't leave anything for speculations. Keep the focus on firmness and decisiveness, and then keep in mind that the people of Iran are the allies of the free world, of the outside world. That's where they want to rely.
Thank you. The second part of his question is, if the E3 were to initiate snapback sanctions against the Iranian regime, given Tehran's threats to withdraw from the NPT, how critical is it that these sanctions are implemented in the broader context of the regime's increasing vulnerabilities?
This regime has been built on threats and intimidation since day one, and their threats and intimidation is not limited to their terrorism. They use every leverage. But the same way you deal with terrorism, the same way you should deal with their threats, such as leaving NPT. They make a lot of threats against the Europeans when it comes to cutting off diplomatic channels, all of those things. Keep in mind that this regime is desperate. This regime is weak. This regime has lost a lot of the clout that they have had in the region. This regime is rejected by its own population inside the country. And that's where you want to just totally disregard these threats about leaving the NPT, hold them accountable, because the NPT doesn't allow them to build nuclear weapons. So when they say we go out of it, and then at the same time enriching uranium to 60%, at the same time they're expelling the IAEA inspectors from Iran, at the same time they're not responding to a dozen of outstanding questions that deals with the weaponization part of the program, not peaceful level enrichment, but weaponization. You have that track record. So what does a threat of leaving NPT mean? It means nothing. So you just keep the focus, hold them accountable, and make them end the nuclear program of the regime. You know, we have made this position long ago, and I'm going to repeat it again, that the entire nuclear program of the Iranian regime is about building the bomb. There's nothing peaceful about that. All of their nuclear sites must be shut down because there's nothing that is legitimate. That's what the position of other nations should also be.
Thank you. Now, it's a question from Doug Ross from Miami Independent. He's asking, have any of the IRGC members become MEK supporters? How concerned are you about the IRGC infiltration into individual MEK cells?
Well, you know, the MEK, which has a network inside Iran, they have been opposed to and fighting the IRGC since 1981. So they're two opposite sides. The IRGC wants to destroy the MEK. The MEK wants to confront them and destroy the IRGC. That's how you're going to see change in Iran. And of course, the IRGC has been very active, along with the Ministry of Intelligence, in identifying and targeting the network inside Iran of the MEK resistance units. In a period of about a year, last year, the MEK announced that over 3,600 members of the resistance units went missing or were killed or arrested, which is a large number. But the good news is that that network has actually expanded. More people have joined than those who have been arrested or harmed by the IRGC. This is a reality of Iran. We need to keep the focus on building the momentum and expanding the momentum against the IRGC and getting them weaker and weaker until the day comes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just very briefly, we have about five minutes. Ed Morrissey of Hot Air is asking, what specific elements of the regime have been weakened since the end of the 12 days war?
Well, I think what was on display in that 12 days, more than any other military aspect of things, was the weakness and the vulnerability of the Iranian regime that was on display for the whole world. This is the regime that boasted about its military might. It's about the protection of these, they have these commanders that create fear among the Iranian population, among the countries in the region. They have all these proxies and all of that. And that 12 days showed the absolute desperation and weakness of the Iranian regime. And so I would say it was the image, most importantly, the image and the authority of the Iran regime was badly damaged in such an irreparable way. There's no way they can make up for it. The people of Iran who had seen the weakness of the regime before saw another level of it. And that's why there's nothing the regime can do about it. And that's why I think the outside world should rely and count on the public, the people who have been protesting against the Revolutionary Guards from now on. Yeah.
Very well. One last question from our online journalists who are watching it. It's from Todd Wood from CD Media in Connecticut. He's asking, are there confirmed terror cells in the U.S., meaning Iranian regime's terror cells in the U.S.?
Well, there certainly are confirmed terror cells in the United States that has been operating. Actually, I mentioned some of the examples here. One thing I did not mention, but maybe I should, is that the 2018 case that the Justice Department in the United States arrested 2 Iran regime agents who were operating on behalf of the Ministry of Intelligence, and they were involved in what the Justice Department affidavit said was a capture and kill operation against the officials of the National Council of Dissidents of Iran. here in the United States. They were arrested, put on trial, and convicted. They went to jail, and one of them was actually a U.S. citizen. The other one was a green card holder who were operating in a way to hide their connections to the Ministry of Intelligence. So this is just one example that I know because we've been directly affected by that. But make no mistake, they have so many of such things that everyone should be focused on, and they need to be identified and prosecuted and expelled. Okay, so I guess our time is up. I want to thank everyone for attending our press conference. Appreciate that, and I'll be available if you need to talk separately. Thank you.